The manager was already moving toward the table before Danielle Okafor had finished speaking. She had not raised her voice. She never raised her voice. That was one of the things people said about her, that she was controlled, precise, the kind of woman who could end a meeting or end a career with the same flat, unbothered tone. So when she leaned toward the edge of her table and told the man in the white shirt that she needed him to do something about the person sitting next to her, he came quickly. They always came quickly when Danielle spoke. The restaurant was one of those midday places that filled with people who wore lanyards and carried leather folders and spoke in low, serious voices about money they hadn't made yet. It smelled like warm bread and expensive coffee. Every table had a small candle that nobody ever lit. Danielle was there because her board members, Neil Graves and Patricia Dunn, had suggested it for their working lunch, and Danielle had agreed because she had stopped caring about restaurants 2 years ago, when she stopped caring about most things that were not the company. She sat with her back to the wall. Old habit. She liked to see the room. That was why she noticed him. He was at the next table, barely 3 feet away. A man, somewhere in his early 30s, with a quiet face and hands that would not stop moving, not fidgeting, not nervous. His hands were doing something specific and deliberate, and the person they were doing it for was a small girl sitting across from him, maybe 7 years old, maybe 8, with 2 braids and a crayon in her fist, and her eyes locked completely on her father's hands like they were the most important thing in the room. Because they were. The man's fingers moved. The girl's face changed. She laughed without sound. Her whole body laughed, shoulders shaking, head tipping back, and then her own small hands came up and moved back at him. And he smiled. The kind of smile that sits in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. The kind you cannot fake. Danielle watched them for 4 seconds longer than she meant to. Then the girl shifted in her seat, and her elbow caught the edge of her drawing paper, and 3 crayons rolled off the table and skidded across the floor. One of them stopped under Danielle's briefcase. The girl reached for it without thinking, leaning sideways off her chair, her small arm stretching into the space that Danielle had been considering hers for the past 20 minutes. The man reached too, leaning across the table, his arm extending into that same narrow corridor of air between their tables, and his hand came down near Danielle's folder, close enough that she felt it as an intrusion, even though nothing had been touched. She did not think about it for very long. She had not been sleeping. She had not been sleeping in 4 days, to be precise, because there was a man named Conrad Briggs who ran a competing firm and had spent the last 6 months disassembling the reputation she had spent 14 years building, and 2 of her board members were now asking questions that frightened her, and she had come to this lunch to reassure them, and instead found herself reassuring no one, least of all herself. She was stretched very thin. She did not know it was showing. She flagged the manager. She told him, quietly and clearly, that the man at the next table had been making her uncomfortable, that his behavior was erratic, that his constant movement, and the way he kept reaching toward her space, was not something she should have to tolerate during a business lunch. She used the word bizarre. She would remember that later. She would wish she could reach back into that sentence and remove it, but words do not work that way. The manager, young, uncertain, trained to accommodate, walked toward the man's table with the particular posture of someone who does not want to be doing what they are about to do. The restaurant went quiet, the way a room goes quiet, when people stop pretending they are not listening. The man looked up at the manager. He did not look confused or defensive. He looked like someone who had been interrupted mid-sentence and was waiting, patiently, to understand why. The manager said something low, something Danielle could not fully hear, and the man's expression shifted, not to anger, not yet, to something more careful, more still. He looked at Danielle. She did not look away. She never looked away. And then he turned back to his daughter, and his hands moved, slow, this time, steady. The girl watched his hands with those serious eyes of hers, and whatever he was signing, it settled something in her face. She nodded once. She picked up a green crayon and went back to her drawing. The silence in the room stretched 1 beat too long. Then a woman at a table near the window stood up. She was perhaps 60 years old, with reading glasses pushed up into white hair and a half-eaten sandwich in front of her that she had clearly forgotten. She did not shout. She simply spoke in a voice built for rooms like this. He is talking to his daughter, she said. In sign language. She is deaf. Nobody moved. The manager took a small, invisible step backward. Danielle felt the words land. She felt the specific, physical sensation of understanding something too late. The way a door closes, and the sound of it reaches you a full second after the wood has already met the frame. She understood what she had watched for 4 seconds longer than she meant to. She understood why the girl's eyes never left the man's hands. She understood the 3 crayons on the floor, and the small arm reaching, and the father leaning across with that long, certain arm, not intruding, just retrieving, just being a father doing the thing fathers do 10,000 times before breakfast. She picked up her coffee cup. She put it down without drinking. Neil Graves said something to her. She did not hear what it was. The man asked a passing waiter for the check. He did not look at Danielle again. He did not make a show of anything. He helped his daughter gather her crayons and fold her drawings, and the girl held up one of the drawings and signed something to him, and he looked at it. Actually looked at it. Really considered it. The way adults forget to consider children's drawings. And his face did something quiet and private, and Danielle looked away because watching it felt like reading someone's letters. He left the table neat. He tucked the chair in. He took his daughter's hand, and she walked beside him, with those braids swinging, completely unaware, it seemed, that the entire room was still watching. Danielle saw the receipt on his table when the waiter collected it. She was close enough to see the tip line. 30%. She sat with Neil and Patricia for another 40 minutes. She answered their questions. She was convincing. She was professional. She was, by every external measure, completely fine. But under the table, out of sight, her hands sat in her lap, still. She kept thinking about the green crayon, about how far it had rolled, about how the girl had watched her father's hands the whole time, even during all of it, even while a grown woman called her father's language bizarre and had never once looked frightened, because her father had told her, with his hands, that everything was fine. And she had believed him. Danielle did not finish her coffee. She did not finish much of anything that day. She went back to her office on the 14th floor with its clean desk and its view of the city and its locked door, and she sat down in her chair, and she stared at the skyline without seeing it, and she thought about the word she had used. Bizarre. She had used it to describe a father talking to his deaf daughter in the only language his daughter could fully hear. Patricia Dunn sent her a text an hour later that said only, "That was not a great look." Danielle read it, put her phone face down on her desk. She pulled up the notes she had taken at lunch, the logistics figures, the quarterly projections, the restructuring proposal she needed to have ready by Thursday. All of it still there, neat and organized, and completely unchanged. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened a blank document. She typed one sentence. She stared at it. She deleted it. She typed it again. Outside her office window, the city moved the way cities move in the afternoon, without pausing, without explaining itself, full of people carrying things nobody else could see. She thought about the girl's braids, the way they swung when she walked. She thought about the man's hands, still and steady through all of it, still signing, still talking to his child, as if the most important thing in the room was always going to be her, and nothing, not a manager, not a restaurant, not a woman with a briefcase who used words like bizarre, was ever going to change that. She sat in her chair for a long time after that. The city kept moving. She did not. The video appeared before sunrise. Someone in the restaurant had held their phone low and steady, and the 22 seconds they captured were very clear. You could hear Danielle's voice. You could see the manager approaching. You could see the man's hands, moving calmly, and his daughter's face, watching. You could see the woman near the window stand up. You could hear what she said. By the time Danielle's alarm went off the next morning, the video had been watched by 900,000 people. By the time she reached her office, it was at 4 million. By noon, 14. Her name was in the subject lines of 43 emails she had not yet opened. Her communications director, a careful and generally unflappable man named Owen Clark, was already in her office when she arrived, which was the first indication that the day was going to require a different kind of energy than she had brought to it. "You've seen it," he said. It was not a question. I've seen it, she said. I need to know what actually happened. She took off her coat, hung it on the hook behind the door, sat down in her chair, and folded her hands on the desk and told him, plainly, and without softening anything, what had happened, what she had seen, what she had said, why she had said it. Owen listened without interrupting, which was something she appreciated about him, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The girl is deaf, he said. Yes. And you didn't know that? No. He nodded slowly. He picked up his tablet and set it down again. He had the look of a man organizing his thoughts into categories by how difficult they were going to be to say. There are already 3 think pieces, he said. One of them is comparing you to. I'll spare you the comparison. The shareholders haven't reacted yet, but it's early. Briggs's company put out a statement this morning, expressing concern for the children in our communities. He did not waste any time. Danielle said nothing. I can have a statement drafted by 10, Owen continued. Acknowledgement, apology, commitment to sensitivity training, maybe a donation announcement to a hearing loss foundation. Clean, controlled, gets ahead of it. She looked at the window. The city was gray that morning, wrapped in low cloud, the kind of flat winter light that flattened everything it touched. Don't draft it yet, she said. Owen paused. Danielle. I said not yet. He left her office. She locked the door, which she almost never did. She pulled up the video on her own phone and watched it once. She watched herself in it. The angle caught her profile, the set of her jaw, the way she spoke to the manager without looking at the man she was speaking about, as if he were a problem in the room, rather than a person in it. She watched the woman stand up. She watched the man's hands, still moving. She put her phone face down. She thought about the statement Owen would draft. She could already see it. She had written enough of them over the years to know exactly what it would sound like. The careful language, the expression of regret without the admission of specifics, the pivot to action, the donation figure, the closing line about commitment to community, all of it correct, all of it the right move, professionally speaking. All of it hollow in a way that she could not explain to Owen, because Owen dealt in strategy, not in the feeling she'd had when she heard the woman near the window say those words. He is talking to his daughter. She opened her laptop. She went to the company's website. She found the community outreach page, which she had not looked at in approximately 8 months, and which confirmed what she had privately suspected, that the program existed largely as a line item and a photograph of her shaking hands with someone at an event she could not now specifically remember. She spent the next 3 hours reading everything she could find about the deaf community in her city, the number of schools, the number of children diagnosed each year, the gap, the significant, specific gap, between the moment a family received a diagnosis and the moment they connected with actual support. The interpreters who worked double shifts in hospitals because there were not enough of them. The parent support groups run by 2 volunteers on folding chairs in a community center that needed a new roof. She read a forum post written by a father. She did not know if it was the same father. She told herself she was not looking for him specifically, who described learning sign language in the weeks after his daughter's diagnosis. He wrote, I did not learn it the way you learn a foreign language for travel. I learned it the way you learn to breathe in a new altitude, because she needed me to, and I needed to be someone she could reach. Danielle read that sentence 3 times. She closed the laptop. She called Owen back in. I'm not doing the statement, she said. Not yet. I need you to find me the name of the director of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Community Center on Albright Street. Owen looked at her. Find me the name, she said again. Meanwhile, the man in the video was being assigned a story by people who had never met him. His name was Marcus Webb, though most of the articles were calling him the signing dad, or the man at the center of the restaurant incident, as if giving him a name might make him too specific, too human, too inconvenient for the shape of the story people had already decided he was in. He was a hero. He was a symbol. He was proof of something, though different people had different ideas about what exactly he was proof of. He was, in reality, a man who woke up at 5:15 every morning and made his daughter a sandwich with the crusts cut off, because she was 7 and had opinions about crusts, and drove a company van with a cracked air vent across the city to fix heating systems in buildings he could never afford to rent space in. He had $11.40 in his checking account that week. He knew this because he had checked it Tuesday morning when he stopped for gas and had to make a calculation. He had not watched the video. He did not have to. He had been there. His daughter Lily had asked him, on the walk back to the car, why the lady was upset. He had told her that some people get frightened by things they don't understand, and that was not her fault, and it was not his fault either. And they were still going to get ice cream on the way home, because it was Friday, and Friday was ice cream day, and nothing about that had changed. She had accepted this with the particular decisiveness of a 7-year-old who trusts her father completely, and had learned, early, that the world would sometimes require that trust to hold weight. He had gotten her the ice cream, mint chip. He'd had a small coffee, and sat across from her while she ate, and drew on a napkin with a pen from his jacket pocket, and the whole thing had taken 20 minutes and cost $4, and had been, by any measure, a good end to the week. He found out about the video the next morning from a woman who lived in his building, who stopped him in the hall with her phone held out, and her eyebrows raised and said, "Is this you?" He watched it. He gave her back the phone. He said, "Yeah." She said something about it being terrible, and him being brave, and he thanked her and went back inside. He did not call anyone. He did not post anything. He had a broken dishwasher and a benefits recertification form due by the end of the month, and a parent-teacher meeting on Thursday, and the internet's opinion of him, in either direction, did not change any of that. What he did do that Saturday afternoon was sit with Lily while she did her homework, and then take her to the community center on Albright Street, where she attended a social hour with other deaf and hard-of-hearing kids every second Saturday, and where he had been volunteering his time for the past 2 years, whenever his schedule allowed. He helped set up chairs. He helped one of the younger kids, a 5-year-old named Benji, practice the signs for colors. He listened while the center's director, a woman named Carol Sims, talked about the roof, which needed $12,000 of work the center did not have. He drove home. He made dinner. He read to Lily, signed to her, the way they always did it, the book open between them, his hands translating the words into something she could hold. She fell asleep with her hand still loosely wrapped around his fingers. He sat in the quiet of her room for a few minutes before he got up. He was not a symbol. He was not a story. He was just a father, in the dark, listening to his daughter breathe. Back in her office, Danielle had the name she needed. She picked up the phone. She began to do the only thing she had ever really known how to do, the thing that had built the company, and survived the hard years, and outlasted every person who had told her she was not enough, or too much, or the wrong kind of woman, in the wrong kind of room. She began, slowly and without any announcement, to fix what she had broken. She did not know yet that the fixing would cost her more than she expected. She did not know yet that it would also give her back something she had given up so long ago she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have it. She did not know yet that a 7-year-old girl with 2 braids and a green crayon had already seen something in her face that she had not been able to see herself. But she was beginning to understand that the girl had not been wrong. Marcus Webb had not eaten a hot meal before 9 o'clock in 3 years. This was not a complaint. It was simply the math of the day. He was on a job site by 7, sometimes 6:30, and he worked until 4 or 5 depending on the work. And then he picked up Lily from after-school care and they came home together and he cooked while she sat on the counter and narrated everything she had done that day in fast, fluid signs, her hands flying, her face doing as much of the storytelling as her fingers. And by the time the food was ready, it was close to 7, and by the time they had eaten and she had bathed and been read to and settled, it was past 8, and Marcus was usually back in the kitchen finishing whatever had gone cold. He ate standing up most nights. He did not mind. On the Tuesday that the envelope arrived, he had been home for exactly 11 minutes. He was still in his work jacket, the gray one with the company logo on the chest, and a small burn mark on the left cuff from a job in November, when Lily brought it to him from the pile of mail she had collected from the box downstairs. She did this every day. She liked sorting the mail. She handed him most of it and kept the catalogs because she liked looking at the pictures. This envelope she handed to him differently. She held it with 2 hands, and her expression was the one she used when something required his full attention. He looked at it. Company letterhead. A real address, not a P.O. box. His name written by hand. Not printed. Actually written. In ink. In handwriting that pressed slightly too hard into the paper. The letters a little cramped. Like someone who had learned to type before they had fully learned to write. He set the rest of the mail on the counter. He opened it. It was one page. It was not long. He read it standing in his jacket with his daughter watching his face the way she always watched faces. Carefully. Reading the small shifts of expression the way other people read words. The letter said, "I was wrong." Not in the way that becomes a press release or a managed statement. Wrong in the way that keeps a person awake. What I said to the manager, the word I used, the assumption I made, none of it was fair, and all of it was mine. I am not writing this because my communications team thinks it is the right move. They do not know I am writing it. I am writing it because you were sitting 3 feet away from me, talking to your daughter, and I turned that into something ugly, and I need you to know that I know that. You do not owe me anything in return. Not a response, not forgiveness, not your time. I only needed you to have this. There was a postscript at the bottom. The handwriting was slightly smaller there, as if she had hesitated before adding it. It said, "Your daughter looked at me near the end. I don't know what she saw, but whatever it was, she seemed to understand it better than I did. Children like that are not ordinary." Marcus read the letter twice. Then he folded it along its original crease and walked to the kitchen drawer, the wide one beside the stove where he kept the things that mattered. Lily's school emergency form, the lease renewal, a photograph of his own father from a long time ago, and he placed the letter inside. He closed the drawer. He turned around, and Lily was watching him with her hands loose at her sides, waiting. He signed, "It is from the woman at the restaurant." Lily's face went through several small, quick calculations. Then she signed, "The scared one?" He looked at his daughter for a long moment. He had not used that word. He had not described the woman that way. He had told Lily, in the car park after it happened, that the woman had been confused, and that confusion sometimes made people act in ways they later wished they hadn't. He had not said anything about fear. He signed, "Why do you say scared?" Lily thought about it. Then she signed, her hands. She kept touching her cup and then putting it down. She did not drink anything the whole time. When people do that, it means they want to leave somewhere, but they can't. Marcus stood very still. He had not noticed the cup. He said, aloud and in sign together the way he often did when something landed in him quietly, "Yeah, Bug. I think you're right." She nodded, satisfied, the way she was when she had identified something correctly, and then she went back to sorting the catalogs on the kitchen table. Flipping pages with that focused, unhurried attention, she gave everything she found interesting. Marcus stood at the counter and thought about a woman who touched a cup without drinking from it, over and over. Through 40 minutes of a working lunch, she was probably desperate to have go well. He did not take the letter back out of the drawer, but he thought about it. The weeks after the video had been strange in the specific way that unwanted attention is always strange, full of people who felt they knew you and wanted to tell you so. A reporter had called the community center trying to get his number. A local news segment had described him as a quiet hero of the city, which had made Carol Sims laugh so hard she had to set down her tea. 2 people from his daughter's school had stopped him in the car park to say they had always known he was special, and he had thanked them both and driven home thinking that they had been pleasant enough acquaintances before, and he was not sure what had changed. What had not changed? The cracked dashboard on the van, the recertification form, the dishwasher, which he had now partially disassembled on a Saturday morning, and was not confident he could fully reassemble. Lily's Thursday teacher meeting, at which her teacher described her as exceptionally perceptive and occasionally impatient with people who take a long time to say simple things, which Marcus felt was an accurate summary and not entirely a problem. What had changed? Quietly and without announcement, the community center on Albright Street had received an anonymous donation of $12,000, deposited directly into their account, 2 weeks after the restaurant incident. Carol had called Marcus about it. She had not known who sent it. There was no name on the transfer, no note, no accompanying letter. Marcus had an idea. He did not share it with Carol. He filed it in the same place he filed the letter, somewhere quiet, somewhere he did not look at too often. He was at the center on the second Saturday of the month when Carol stopped him between sessions, pulling him aside into the narrow hallway near the supply closet, where they always had conversations that needed privacy. "I got a call yesterday," she said. "From the communications director of Okafor Logistics. The CEO wants a meeting." Marcus leaned against the wall. "With the center," Carol continued, "about their outreach program. They want to rebuild it, apparently. Make it real instead of—" She made a small motion with her hand that summarized, efficiently, every corporate community initiative that had ever existed, largely as a photograph. "And you're telling me because," Marcus said. "Because she specifically asked," Carol said, "through her communications director, whether you might be willing to be part of the conversation. Not as a condition. She was clear about that. She said if you were not comfortable, the meeting happens anyway, and your name never comes up." Marcus looked at the ceiling. It still needed work. The donation had covered the roof. The ceiling tiles in the hallway were a separate category of problem. "What do you think she actually wants?" he said. Carol considered this. Carol Sims had been running the center for 11 years and had a highly calibrated sense for what people wanted when they came through her doors. "I think," she said slowly, "that she is trying to do something real and doesn't entirely know how, and she has figured out that the only way to learn how is to ask someone who does." Marcus was quiet. "Wear the blue shirt," Carol said, and walked back into the session room. He did wear the blue shirt. He ironed it the night before, which he did not do with most shirts, while Lily watched from the couch, with the expression of someone supervising important work. She had chosen the shirt. She had firm opinions about clothing. The meeting was at the community center, not at the company's offices. That had been Carol's condition, stated simply and accepted without negotiation. Marcus arrived 7 minutes early. Carol was already there. Danielle Okafor arrived exactly on time, which told him something, and she came alone, which told him more. She was taller than she had seemed in the restaurant. She was wearing a gray jacket and carrying a notebook, a real one, paper, not a tablet, and she looked like someone who had prepared for this meeting and was also quietly nervous about it, and was doing what people like her always did with nervousness, which was to organize it into professionalism and hope nobody noticed the seam. She shook Carol's hand. She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Webb," she said. "Marcus," he said. She nodded. "Danielle." They sat. The room was the meeting room, which was also the room where the parent support group met on Tuesday evenings, and which had 4 mismatched chairs, and a folding table, and a window that let in more cold than warmth. Danielle sat down in one of the mismatched chairs without comment, which he noticed. She opened the notebook. She began to tell them what she wanted to do. Not what the company wanted to announce, not what the communications team had drafted. She was clear about that distinction, and she made it early, which also told him something. She wanted to fund real interpreter access in the 2 nearest hospital emergency rooms. She wanted to underwrite the parent support group so that Carol's volunteers could be paid. She wanted to establish a fund for ASL literacy classes for newly diagnosed children's families, the first months after diagnosis, she said, which tend to be the hardest, tend to also be the most poorly served. Marcus listened. He asked 3 questions. He could see, from the way she answered them, that she had done her homework, and he could see from the things the homework had not covered that she needed someone who understood the ground differently than a research document did. He told her what the community actually needed, not the decorative version, not the version that photographed well. He told her about Benji, the 5-year-old, whose parents had not yet connected with any support network 3 months after his diagnosis, because the intake process at the nearest program had a 6-week wait list. He told her about the 3 deaf advocates who had been volunteering their skills for 2 years without compensation, because the center could not afford to pay them. He told her about the parent who had cried in the support group the previous Tuesday, because her child had come home from school and signed something to her, and she had not been able to understand it, and had watched the understanding leave her child's face. Danielle wrote everything down. She did not interrupt. She did not redirect toward what was easier. She wrote. At some point the conversation moved, the way conversations do when the formal part runs out. into something slightly less structured. Carol had made tea, which appeared on the table the way Carol's tea always appeared, without announcement, simply there. They drank it. The room was still cold, but slightly less so. Danielle was talking about the interpreter program, about the logistics of emergency room access, about whether the city health authority would need to be brought in. She was talking, and Marcus was listening, and then she said something about the first time she had understood what it meant to be without language in a medical situation, and she said it in a way that was slightly sideways, attached to something else, the way people talk when they are approaching something they have not said out loud in a long time. She stopped herself. She looked at her notebook. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was a detour." "Don't," Marcus said. She looked up. He said it again, not harshly. "Just don't." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, quietly, and without looking at her notebook, "I have a younger brother. His name is Elijah. He is hard of hearing. We have not spoken in 6 years." Carol did not say anything. Marcus did not say anything. The room held the information the way a room does when someone has set something down in it that they have been carrying a long time. "It's not relevant," Danielle said. "It's completely relevant," Carol said, in the mild tone she used for things that were not open to discussion. Danielle looked at her hands. She turned the pen over once. "I made choices," she said. "When I was younger. When I was building the company, I moved fast. I did not slow down for anyone who needed me to slow down. I told myself it was temporary." She paused. "It was not temporary." Marcus said nothing. He understood about the things people told themselves were temporary. Then she asked him something. She asked how he had learned sign language so quickly. She had heard somewhere that it had taken him 8 weeks after Lily's diagnosis, and she asked with genuine curiosity, the kind that does not have an agenda attached. He thought about how to answer it. "I didn't think of it as learning a language," he said. "I thought of it as learning how to listen to my kid." She was quiet. Then she picked up her pen and wrote it down, slowly, the way she had written down the things about the interpreter program and the parent support group and the advocates who needed to be paid. She wrote it down like it was information she needed to keep. She stared at what she had written. She did not speak for a moment. Marcus watched her and said nothing, and thought about a woman who had touched a cup without drinking from it, and a 7-year-old who had noticed, and how sometimes the person who sees you most clearly is the one you never expected to be seen by. The night after the meeting, Danielle sat in her car in the parking garage beneath her building for 9 minutes before going inside. She did not do this as a habit. She was not someone who sat in parking garages. She was someone who moved from one place to the next with intention and efficiency, who took stairs instead of waiting for elevators, who read documents during commutes and returned calls during walks, and had reorganized her entire life, over many years, so that there was no unaccounted-for time in which to feel things she had not scheduled. But she sat in the car for 9 minutes. She was thinking about what Marcus had said, not the words about sign language, though those were sitting in her chest somewhere, but the thing before it, the thing Carol had called completely relevant. She was thinking about the word she had not used, the specific word, the one that named what she had done at 22, when she had chosen speed over everything else, and called it ambition, and moved on. The word was not complicated. The word was left. She had left Elijah behind, not cruelly, not with any specific event she could point to. She had simply moved at a velocity that did not accommodate the pace he needed, and rather than adjust, she had kept moving, and the distance between them had grown the way distances grow when neither person is walking toward the other, not dramatically, just steadily, one day at a time, until one day it was 6 years, and she no longer knew his address. She picked up her phone. She found his name in her contacts. Still there. She had never deleted it. She was not sure what that meant, except that some part of her had always known she would need it eventually. She pressed call. It rang 4 times. She was certain it would go to voicemail and she would leave something careful and controlled and he would listen to it, and perhaps never call back, and she would have made the gesture and that would have been sufficient. It went to voicemail. His voice was different than she remembered. Older, more settled. He said his name and asked callers to leave a message, and the recording was the businesslike one, not the personal one, and she did not know if that was because she was not in his contacts anymore, or simply because that was the voicemail he used. She said her name. She paused. Then she said, "I learned something today. About listening. I think I should have learned it a long time ago. I think there are things I should have said to you a long time ago. I don't need anything from you. I know I don't have the right to need anything. But I wanted you to hear my voice. And I wanted you to know that I am aware of what I gave up." She ended the call. She sat for another minute. Then she went inside. The next 3 weeks moved the way weeks move when actual work is being done. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the specific, unglamorous momentum of people making real decisions and following through on them. Danielle met twice more with Carol at the community center. She brought Owen to one of those meetings because the funding structure needed someone who understood the contracts, and she was aware that she had been keeping Owen at a distance from this project in a way that was not entirely practical, driven partly by the feeling that the moment it became a managed initiative, it would become a different thing. Owen handled it well. He understood, she thought, more than he let on. The interpreter access program at the 2 hospitals required coordination with the hospital administration and the city health authority, and that process was slow and full of people who were supportive in principle and cautious in practice, which Danielle understood because she had spent her career in rooms full of people who were supportive in principle and cautious in practice. She was patient. She had not always been patient. She was working on it. The 3 deaf advocates were offered paid consultant contracts. 2 accepted immediately. The third, a man named Gregory who had been volunteering at the center for 4 years and who had, according to Carol, the finest expressive ASL of anyone she had ever met, asked for 2 weeks to think about it. He wanted to make sure, he said, that accepting payment would not change the nature of what he did. This was the kind of thing that Danielle, 8 months ago, might have found impractical. She found it, now, completely understandable. He accepted after 12 days. The ASL literacy program for families of newly diagnosed children was the one she cared about most, though she had not said this to anyone. It was the one she thought about at night. She thought about the mother Carol had described, the one whose child had signed something and seen the understanding leave her mother's face. She thought about that moment, a child watching the words leave their own hands and dissolve before they reached the person they loved most. She thought about what it would mean to close that gap, not eventually, now, quickly, in the first weeks, when everything was most frightening and most formative. She put the most money there. She did not announce any of this publicly. Owen drafted a brief press release, because some acknowledgement was necessary, and silence would be its own kind of message, but it was short, and it did not use the word redemption, which Owen had originally included and which she had crossed out. "No redemption narrative," she told him. "Then what's the narrative?" he asked. "There isn't one," she said. "There's just the work." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and revised the release. The thing she was not prepared for came on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 weeks after the meeting at the center. Carol sent her a photograph. No message, just the image. It showed a woman, young, perhaps 28 or 29, with dark circles under her eyes and a coat that looked like she had slept in it, though she had not, sitting across a small table from a deaf advocate in the first session of the new family literacy program. Between them was a picture book. The advocate's hands were moving. The woman was watching with the specific, total attention of someone who has understood that everything depends on what they are about to learn. And on the woman's face, not yet understanding, not yet competent, still at the stage where every sign was an effort and every correct movement was a small victory, was something that Danielle recognized. It was the look of someone who had been very scared and had decided, in spite of that, to try. Danielle enlarged the photograph. She sat with it for a long time. Then she put her phone down and went back to the quarterly projections on her desk, the ones that still needed to be reviewed before Thursday, the ones that were still her responsibility in the same way they had always been, the company still running, the world still requiring her attention in its usual variety of urgent and practical ways. But the photograph was still on her phone when she left the office that evening, and she looked at it again, briefly, in the elevator on the way down, and she thought, not for the first time, this is the thing that lasts. Not the quarterly numbers. Not the press release. Not the managed narrative. This. A woman learning to hear her child. She stepped out into the street. It was cold. She did up the top button of her coat, the one she usually left open, and walked toward the parking garage. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Area code she did not recognize. She almost did not answer. She was tired. She had a call at 7 and a document due by 9, and she almost let it go to voicemail. She answered. A voice said her name. Male. Careful. Slightly older than she remembered, and more settled, the same way it had sounded on the voicemail recording. She stopped walking. Elijah, she said. Yeah, he said. The street moved around her. People passed. A bus went by. The cold pressed in from all sides. She said, "Thank you for calling back." He said, "I almost didn't." "I know," she said. "I understand that." There was a pause. Not an empty one. The kind of pause that has weight, that has history in it, that takes up the space where easier words would go, if either of them had easier words available. Then Elijah said, "What did you learn?" She stood on the pavement and thought about a father's hands, steady through everything. She thought about a little girl's face, watching. She thought about a young mother in a coat she had slept in, learning to reach her child one sign at a time. She thought about what Marcus had said, not as a lesson to be passed along, but as the thing that had rearranged something in her she had not known was out of order. That listening, she said slowly, is not something that happens to you. It's something you choose. And I stopped choosing it a long time ago, with a lot of people, including you. The street was very quiet for a moment. Elijah said, "That's a start." She breathed out. The cold took her breath, and turned it visible, and it dissolved into the air above her. "Yeah," she said. "I know. I'm not asking for more than that." They talked for a long time. Not easily. Not without the places where the conversation went careful and slow, where the wrong word almost happened, and one of them pulled back and tried again. There were things that had been said in the past that sat in the conversation like stones in a riverbed. You could not ignore them and you could not move them quickly. You just had to step around them carefully and keep going. There were 6 years of ordinary life that had happened to him that she knew nothing about. A job change, an apartment in a city she had never visited, a woman he had mentioned twice and then not mentioned again, and she did not push, because she did not yet have the right to push. But they talked. For 50 minutes they talked, until she was sitting in her car in the parking garage again, not 9 minutes this time, but 50, and the cold had come in through the vents and she did not start the engine. At the end, before they said goodbye, Elijah said, "The girl in the video, the little one." "Yes," Danielle said. "She looked at you." She did. What was she thinking? Danielle looked at the concrete wall of the parking garage. She thought about braids swinging. She thought about green crayons. She thought about a 7-year-old who noticed that someone was touching a cup without drinking from it, and understood what that meant before the adults in the room had worked it out. "I think," Danielle said, "she was reading me." Elijah was quiet. "She got it right," Danielle added. "Yeah," he said. "Kids usually do." He said he would call again. She said she would answer. Neither of them made it a promise, because promises required a kind of certainty they had not yet rebuilt, and both of them were old enough to know the difference between a promise and an intention, and to know that an intention, honestly held, was sometimes the more honest thing to offer. She said goodnight. He said goodnight. She sat in the car for 3 more minutes, not because she was avoiding going inside, just because she needed the quiet, just because something had shifted and she wanted to feel it fully before she moved. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a cracked lobby tile and a buzzer that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't, Marcus Webb was reading to his daughter, signing to her, the book open between them, his hands giving shape to the words, her eyes following every movement with that total, unhurried attention. She reached up, partway through a page, and put her hand over his for a moment. Not to stop him, just to feel the movement, just to be connected to it. He kept signing. His hand moved under hers. She felt every word. That was how the real story ended. Not with a press conference or a trend or a comment section full of people deciding what it meant. Not with the video, which had been watched and reshared and captioned and argued over, and eventually replaced by the next video and the next story. It ended, or rather, it continued, in the quiet places. In a community center where 3 advocates now arrived on Tuesday mornings knowing they would be paid for their time. In a hospital corridor where a family waited with a deaf child and an interpreter was already there. In a room where a woman in a coat she had slept in was learning to say her daughter's name with her hands, and her daughter was signing it back. In a parking garage where a woman sat alone and let herself feel 50 minutes of her brother's voice. In an apartment, late, where a man's hands kept moving, kept speaking, kept being the one thing in the world his daughter never had to reach for. She already had it. She had always had it. That was the truth that shocked everyone who had thought the story was about a restaurant. It was never about the restaurant. It was about the distance people build, quietly, over years, between themselves and the people who need them most. And the moment, unremarkable, unannounced, sometimes prompted by a stranger in a room, and sometimes by a video, and sometimes by a letter, written in cramped handwriting that pressed too hard into the page, when they look at that distance and decide it is no longer acceptable. The moment when they choose, finally, to cross it. Not because they are heroes, not because the story required it, but because somewhere, a child is signing a word, and the person they love most is learning, at last, to read it.